CFB Paint back again. We are less than 10 days out from college football. I just feel like the days are starting to drag. Is that just me? I feel like this time is the worst. Like between the start of fall camp and you start to get some of that intel and whispers and people reporting on actual football, and then the start of football, it just seems interminable. So this year, I got smart. I have a vacation. My wife and I are leaving this Friday. We are taking all of next week off. So by the time I'm back, week 0 will have happened, and we will be heading into week 1. I think it's genius. I think I'm going to plan that at least between August 14th and whatever the start of week 1 is. I think I'm always going to take a week off from now on. So that's the plan.
Yeah, the only way I'm getting through this is like paying for the insider intel of what's going on in certain practices so that I can know what's going on, so that I have something that I can breathe off of. Because recruiting stalled, you have practice, getting ready, fall camp, getting ready, and then you're waiting for the games. I'm like, all right, I need something.
Yeah.
Yeah, go, Bray.
I'm surviving on European football has just started, and so it's the lesser, it's not the one I'm looking forward to all fall, but it starts a few weeks before college football does, and so I can at least have something to look forward to on the weekends. That said, all the games are done by like 1 o'clock, so later in the day I'm waiting. I'd love my Pac-12 after dark at that point, but it's something until college football gets going, and then it really gets pushed to the back burner once the actual season gets started.
Yeah, well, we are there just about. We're almost there. Tonight, we're going to go through playoff contenders and predictions. We'll talk through our Heisman predictions as well. I was the famous one who selected a player who only played in, I think, 3 games all of last year for my Heisman pick in Jackson Smith-Njigba. But before we do that, feel like we should recognize the coaches poll and the AP poll have now both been released. I don't know if there are any burning reactions to that. We talked about maybe discussing anyone who maybe had a take on teams that maybe were the pollsters treated very generously, or maybe there were some where they're being slept on a little bit too much. Bri, I think you mentioned you had a couple that you wanted to share. Go ahead, give it to us.
Yeah, I'll start with a couple who I think are overrated. And this is overrated's harsh because it's like, I don't think ratings should exist right now. Like this is not something I'm a big fan of, is having preseason polls. So let's preface it with that. And the other thing I'll preface it with is this is not a prediction of where I expect you to be at the end of the year. This is who I think the best 25 teams are. And that's really not what the rankings are about once you get into the season. It's about who you've proven yourself to be, not who would be favored in any given week. So preseason's a little bit different in that regard to me. But with those caveats put in there, a couple teams I want to highlight that I think are overrated. Not that they can't have success this year or won't have, higher rankings by the end of the season, but I think they're rated higher than teams who are going to be better than them in the season upcoming. First one I have, and this one seems harsh as me, the lover of the group of 5, but it's Tulane in at number 24 in the AP poll. Let me just read a couple. I think they would lose to Arkansas. I think they would lose to UCLA. I think they would lose to South Carolina. I think they would lose to maybe an NC State. I think there's a good handful of teams that would get the best of them. They do have Pratt coming back this year, and he is a good quarterback. But Tyjae Spears also had 1,500 yards last year. And they are rebuilding their receiving core. His top 2 targets are gone. He's got no line that's back. So there's a chance for things to go well, and Willie Fritz is still around. I just don't think they're a top 25 team. Now, I think by the end of the season, will they finish in the top 25? Yes, because I think they're better than most of the teams that they play on their schedule. So they'll get the wins and they'll earn the rating that they get later. And I'm okay with that. I don't have an issue with that. But since this is preseason, we're just saying who we think is the best. I can't go ahead and say I think they're better than South Carolina or better than Arkansas. Like that doesn't quite track as well for me. The other team I wanted to highlight, and this one might be a little bit more controversial because I know some people are high on Kiffin's crew, but I have to say Ole Miss at number 23, I think is a little high. Last year I was pretty low on them throughout the season. They went, I think, 7-0 to start the season and dropped 5 games, 5 of the last 6. And they didn't beat anyone of note, in my opinion, last year. And that's sometimes you say that because like people don't play a whole lot of people of note, but they had opportunities. So their biggest win maybe it's Troy, or maybe it's a 3-point win over Texas A&M, who was kind of a mess last year, but still had some good performances, right? They got the best of LSU near the end of the season. But they played Alabama decently well, to their credit. It's a prettier loss than, you hope for a win, but pretty loss against a good opponent. We also lose against Mississippi State. You get pretty well dominated by Texas Tech in the bowl game, and bowl games are, kind of tough to judge. And you lose to, who should you lose to in that? LSU and Tennessee. They played Tennessee last year? I might be getting that wrong.
I'll look it up.
Arkansas. Sorry, it wasn't Tennessee. Arkansas is the other loss. And so, that was kind of who I thought they were. They have this 8-5 record. It's about right. They beat the teams they should. They don't beat any of the teams who I think are, should be ranked higher than them. Arkansas is the one that's a little bit iffy because they had an up and down season with the way things went. But I don't think we're going to see massive improvement year over year with this team. You have the same quarterback coming back who you were unconvinced of, and you took 2 transfers and they couldn't displace him. He's still the quarterback. I know Lane Kiffin's the self-dubbed king of the transfer portal, so we'll see what's done there. But and you have a phenomenal running back coming back. Quinshon Judkins, one of the best in the country. But guess what? He had about 100 yards a game against all those teams that they lost to. Had 200 yards against one of them, and you still lost. So I don't think that's going to be enough. I think you're going to need to make a decent step up. South Carolina, I'll cite again as they're a team who got a lot of votes who wasn't in the top 25, but one that I'd rather see in the top 25 in the AP poll than Ole Miss.
Corey, do you have any to add or any rebuttal?
I like the way Brian kind of takes this analogy because rankings from a coaches poll and from a US or from a coaches poll and from an AP poll are like, what have you done, kind of like compared to what we expected you to do, and how are you moving up along the rankings compared to what you played? But it's not who's better than who, right? And so it's interesting how you could do rankings. I think you have the people that have the formulas. They are kind of just saying who's better than who would win in a game, etc. And they're trying to rank those people that way. So in my head, I'm like Brian said, I don't think these people would be ranked necessarily at the end of the year or change it at the end of the year. I kind of took that in my analogy. I said, who do I think teams that are better than they are ranked, that the people are sleeping on? So I am a big believer in Oklahoma. I think Oklahoma turns it around. I think they compete for a Big 12 championship. And I get that they have to prove to everybody else to move themselves up in the rankings, but I think they're better than 19th in the coaches poll, and in the AP poll they are 20th. I think they're better than 20th ranked team. Also, Oregon. I believe Oregon's going to be a good team this year. I've picked them as my Pac-12 winner. They're ranked 15th in both polls. I think they're going to be up there. If they don't win, I think they'll be one of the top 2 teams, and I don't think you're that much farther off from being a top 10 team. Other teams I think people are sleeping on. I know pretty much all my teams that people are sleeping on, these teams have to prove it. Wisconsin, with Luke Fickell and Phil Longo, it's going to be an awesome sight to watch it in the Big Ten. It'll be so exciting to see how he brings that offense into there. I think people are sleeping on them. I think they could be a potentially really, really good team, especially with who they play. I mean, I see their biggest competition being Iowa. We'll see how that goes. 2 other teams that are not in the polls and did receive votes. Interesting one. We'll talk first one. South Carolina. Brian talked about them. I agree. I think they're a top 25 team. I believe in Beamer ball. I think this team can show it can be successful. And I believe Shane Beamer can figure out ways to make them successful where they are hurting. And like I said, I'm a believer that Spencer Rattler is starting to turn a corner. The other team that I kind of find interesting is Florida. Now, if you look at the AP top 10 or the AP top 25, they received 4 votes in other receiving votes. If you look at the coaches poll, they're third off the list. They have 63 votes. Not that they're close, right? There's 196 for number 25, but they're the third off the list. And I kind of lean with the coaches. I think this team is going to be better than people expect them to be. I've seen the graphic that says, wow, quarterback is Mertz. What's the name?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I've seen the graphic that says like what he was in every single position from last year was like last in FBS quarterbacks. I don't know if you guys have seen that graphic. But what I think is he needs to be a game manager. He needs to be efficient with the short passes and complete those short to mid range passes, just enough to keep the teams and defenses honest, so that the runs can open up. From the words that I'm hearing in practice, is he's been pretty good at that. He doesn't have that boom, I'm going to beat you over the top kind of arm, but he's been playing within himself. And the dude has 32 starts or something like that. Like, you got to give him some credit where some credit's due. I think he can figure out how to get this team to a manageable place. I mean, if I was betting on this 5.5 wins, I'm definitely betting the over. I'm guessing closer to 7-8, in my opinion. Those are my underrated teams. My overrated teams, you guys are not going to like some of these. Notre Dame, this is me being a hypocrite a little bit, because I'm like, prove it. Like, I don't believe it. And even though the other teams I've just said, hey, they have to show to prove it. I don't believe Notre Dame has what it takes to get there. I'm interested to see how Sam Hartman kind of integrates into Notre Dame. And he came over to be with Tommy Rees, and Tommy Rees is gone. So, like, that'll be an interesting kind of dynamic. Overrated, LSU, in my opinion. Now, not significantly overrated, but I do feel like they're overrated. I feel like Bama is going to be a better team than them. I feel like Florida State is going to be a better team than them. People talked about how LSU significantly improved from last year. I'm like, did they? I get that Boutier didn't play super well, the All-American wide receiver from 2 years ago. Didn't play super well last year. And Neighbors played pretty well. But, like, that kind of seems about even for me, what I would expect from the year before. And he comes back. I get that you had a defensive tackle that went down in the first game of the year that comes back, who's probably going to be All-American. I think you get better there. I think you get a little bit better at linebacker. I know that there's probably some development there, but that back end is still a mystery, especially with the recent shenanigans that have been going on in the LSU camp. You still have the OSU transfer that's going to be there, which is going to be good for them. But he's still, fourth, fifth string at OSU, so he wasn't seeing the playing field there. So I don't see this team being exceptionally better than they were a year ago. I know people do. I think Florida State is actually, you can look at Florida State and go, holy crap, they added Ventrell Cypress. Holy crap, they added. There's 2 or 3 people on LSU that you can say that to, but you can't say Ventrell Cypress. You can't say Jaheim Bell. You can't say, just to go off of Keon Coleman. Those are going to be game changers. Will those 2 cornerbacks? I think those are the 2 best transfers that they have, and if Denver plays at all, be game changers to them, that they are significantly better. Because if you look at the end of the season, they struggled against some teams that they should not have struggled against. They lost A&M, and they scored 15 points against Arkansas or something like that. I can't remember off the top of my head. So I just think I think they're a top 12, 13 team, but I'm not sure they're a top 7 team, and I think they're ranked 5th in the coaches poll and 5th
5 in both.
Yeah, and I think you put them against USC. I think USC has a good chance to beat them. You put them against Florida State. I think Florida State beats them. You put them against Clemson. I think Clemson beats them. And I mean, how many times out of 10? I'm not going to give you that, but I think those are better teams. Last 2, I'll go quick. Or last one, overrated TCU. You caught lightning in a bottle last year. Your offensive coordinator has moved on. You got to prove it to me that you really belong here. That you're going to be an awesome team. They're 17th in the AP top 10 and 16th in the coaches poll. I think that people are giving them a little bump because they were good last year, but I think they're closer to a 20, 21, 22 kind of team, in my opinion. So my long shenanigan is over. Sorry, guys.
I'll enhance it real quick. Your LSU poor performance at the end of last season was against Arkansas, 13 points. Less than 100 yards passing for Jaden Daniels. You weren't playing KJ Jefferson or Malik Hornsby. You're playing Colin Fortin. So,
yeah.
Colin? I might have got that first name wrong. Cade Fortin. Sorry, Cade. But yeah, they win that one 13-10, but it's not a pretty look.
No.
Yeah, and Arkansas wasn't exactly a defensive juggernaut last year. Interesting. I'm kind of all over the place when it comes to rankings, just because it feels like it's kind of a conveyor belt, right? Like everyone moves up until someone, loses, and then everyone else slides up a couple spots. What I don't love is how it gives kind of an unfair advantage to those that are kind of preseason ranked really high. It gives you a little extra forgiveness. And I'm big on, I'm going to nerd out for just a second, but the the psychological fallacy of anchoring, I think, is legitimate, and no one talks about it as far as how the rankings then affect like the playoff committee, for example. Like anchoring is when I said I believe it's a real thing, it is a real thing. It's an actual phenomenon. You
Why
can
don't you
Google
explain
it.
anchoring a little bit too? What you're
Oh boy, I am not a psychologist, but essentially, when a number is put in front of someone associated with some sort of, for example, if I was, they've done kind of wild studies on it, and so I'm going to paraphrase one and get it really wrong. But one of the famous studies on it is they would bring people into a classroom and have a number just written on the chalkboard. And then they would ask the people, how many countries in the continent of Africa do you believe are part of the United Nations? And when they put people in that room and the number on the board was like 50, their answers gravitated toward that number. It's an anchor, right? You gravitate toward that. And when they brought in separate people and put in like a single digit number, they gravitate toward that. So our brains do that. And that's why in negotiations, like, you want to speak first, because even if you say like, hey, I'm willing to purchase that car, but I'm willing to purchase it for $10,000, the person selling the car is going to say, well, I don't want to sell it for 10,000, but maybe for 13. And it anchors, you get you close to that number, right? And so even if the numbers in the AP and coaches poll don't have any value or meaning, right? But when those playoff committee members watch the games and they see a number next to those teams, even if they think, LSU's maybe not the number 5 team, but they're probably in the top 7, like, that is a real advantage that no one talks about. I understand why the TV, for rating purposes, the broadcast companies will put numbers next to teams so it looks like a more important matchup, or it looks like a big matchup when you've got a single digit team versus another single digit team. But I really don't love that part of it. And so even though the playoff rankings don't come out until well into the year, I do feel like these polls still kind of play a part in that.
Yeah, Danny Cannell talked about this recently, and he's a former Knoll, but he was talking about this. Corey talked about LSU and FSU, and he said the rankings matter in this case because if FSU wins that game, they probably just swap rankings. FSU's at number 8, LSU's number 5. FSU jumps a little bit, LSU drops a little bit. But if FSU loses that game and they start at number 8, they probably drop down to like 12, 13. And it's just a matter of what's in the head of the person who's looking at the numbers already and going, oh, see, well, they weren't ready to punch up that high yet. And it's like, no, these are two teams that are on what we expect to be like pretty level footing, and we shouldn't let what they're previously rated based on nothing, because again, no teams have done anything up to this point. We shouldn't let that overweigh the way that we view them going forward.
One interesting thing is, you talked about, like, if they put the numbers on there, it makes it a bigger game. If you don't put the numbers on there, like, you look at the pro football, it's every game is kind of, as I'm not a passionate pro football fan, right? Every game is kind of like, I don't really know who's going to win. I don't really know I know who's kind of favored, but like, is it all that interesting? Like, oh, you have the Kansas City Chiefs are playing the Chargers. They're both number 1 in their division. That might be the closest you can get to something.
I think records is what they do
Yeah.
to try and supplement that.
And that's
But yeah.
why I think, like, it'd be cool if you go to these super conferences and you start playing kind of similar like soccer does, and you play your entire table, and you play everybody in your conference, and you start to see a table kind of created. That's why conferences are actually enjoyable. You kind of see that. I think that would be awesome, because it's like, all right, now you've got like Arsenal and Liverpool playing for the 4th spot, or or Clemson and Florida State playing for the 4th spot. And I think that'd be fun.
If I could just give a 2 seconds of what my dream system would be. So a lot of I'm a chess fan. A lot of big chess tournaments, they'll have like 165 entrants or something like that into a tournament. But instead of doing knockouts, what they'll do is they'll do a Swiss model where you're randomized the first round, you play somebody, and then the next round is everybody who won a game will play against somebody else who won. Everyone who lost will play against somebody who lost. And then the next round will be the 2-0 people all play each other, the 1-1 people all play each other, the 0-2 people all play each other. And so you start to really see this hierarchy of like, okay, the top players are playing the best people not over and over again, but playing from the pool of the best players until they've really cemented themselves as the top, or drop back down to the middle because they had maybe easier, more favorable matchups. Obviously, for scheduling, something like that's never really feasible, but like that's the sort of thing that you would love to see, where you get to see like, hey, you play through everyone and we really get to sort out who's the cream of the crop.
Who are we playing
Anyway,
next week? Oh man, we're traveling to Austin next week.
yeah. Oh dang it, Texas won last week, so we're the only two left undefeated teams. We're gonna have to play them.
It's a cool
I think
idea.
that sort of thing would be awesome. Obviously, not practical in any way, but would be nice.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's probably another discussion for perhaps an off-season episode for this upcoming off-season as we're getting right to the meat of things. That's an interesting one for us to kind of talk and hash out. But um, I guess moving forward, now that we kind of have talked about the rankings a little bit, I think it kind of bleeds into kind of like I was saying, just like, all right, you do get a little bit of a bump if you're ranked higher, but we wanted to talk through playoff contenders and ultimately go through our playoff predictions and I mean, I'm assuming, are you guys ready to like talk champion like all the way through it? Okay, good, cool. Me too. Uh, so yeah, let's go through it. I mean, maybe we go in that same order. Brian, maybe take us through some of your some of the teams you considered, and then maybe give us your playoff prediction. Yeah, maybe we'll just have you just go straight on through, like talk through your contenders, who you actually think is going to make it, who ends up winning, and then we'll move on to Corey and then to me.
Yeah. So first thing I looked at was, are there any Group of Five teams I need to consider in this? Because in previous years, Cincinnati's made it, and I was like, I want to make sure I don't leave out somebody who I definitely should. This year, I don't see a team that's going to make it from the Group of Five. I just don't see the pathway there. I don't really have them among my contenders. Of course, anybody who goes undefeated will be, but eliminated that. And then I thought, okay, so basically what we're going to need is we're going to need to be undefeated or one-loss conference champions of the Power Five conferences. So looking at the Pac-12 is one of the toughest ones because there's a lot of quality in there, a lot of room for people to slip up against, like a Washington State, who's not a garbage team, but also not a team I expect to be contending. Oregon State, very similar, a little bit better than Washington State in my opinion, but not one that I really see a path quite to the playoff, but could have a very good season. So USC, Washington, Oregon are the ones that stick out to me. That could make it through. They all have the strength of schedule that I think they don't need any favors done to them in other conferences. I don't think they'd get left out if they went undefeated. If they're one loss, perhaps they'll need a favor, but I think there's a good chance we get 4 different conferences in this next playoff. Texas and Oklahoma are the two that jump out to me. I'm not a big Kansas State guy. I think they're good. I just don't think they're going to be as good as those top two. Texas especially has a mulligan. If they can win that Alabama game, they can go one loss to Alabama and look great, and I think still make the playoff, provided they win the Big 12. But if
Agreed.
they win that Alabama game, then you've got one in the pocket, and you can lose to whoever. Take any random loss, and it's like, yeah, but we beat Alabama, and we're the Big 12 champs. I think it could still make it in. So they've really got the power in their schedule to substantiate what they may need for a loss that occurs. In the SEC, oh, sorry, Corey, go ahead.
No, it's interesting that you say that because I've heard a lot of other people talking about like if whoever loses that game is out of the playoffs, like, and other people view it differently. But it's surprising to me because I kind of view it a little bit your way as long as the loss is to a quality team.
Yeah, and there's a couple teams that have that sort of. Yeah, certainly if we look at the Big Ten, we've got in my opinion, 3 contenders there. You've got Penn State, Ohio State, and Michigan, and there's a possibility of like a 3-way we all beat each other once. I think the conference champion still has a good chance to make the playoff at that point because it's losing to Penn State is nothing to be embarrassed about. Losing to Michigan, certainly not. Ohio State, same thing. So it helps. I think it helps for Texas, Alabama because it's out of conference and it won't hurt their chances of making it to the conference title game. And a similar effect, LSU and Florida State. LSU can lose that game, but if you're beating Alabama, and I think they have Alabama at Tuscaloosa, which
It's in Tuscaloosa. Mm-hmm.
no small thing if you get that win. So I think a lot of people can overlook, week 1 lost to Florida State. Sorry, going back, my 3 teams from the Big Ten: Penn State, Ohio State, Michigan. 3 teams from the SEC that I can see winning the conference and therefore earning a bid into the, or being close to winning the conference and getting a secondary bid into the playoff. Georgia's the obvious one. Their schedule is really light, but also they're really good. So it's just hard to see them slipping up anywhere there, except maybe Tennessee. LSU and Alabama. Tennessee's a fringe one for me. I think they have a much higher chance of losing a game that they shouldn't than the other three. I think the other ones are kind of a big enough step up. Tennessee just has enough question marks where you've lost your two biggest wide receivers, or deep threats as wide receivers. Brew McCoy's still back and will be good there, and you're hoping Squirrel White will step up. And also Joe Milton is small sample size for us still. We're waiting to see it over the course of the season. Obviously, torched Clemson in the bowl game, but still, I'd say more unknown there than you have with Alabama, Georgia, and with LSU. In the ACC, Clemson, Florida State, and I think those are the only two, and they might need a favor. Not if they go undefeated. If they go undefeated, they'll make it. I think this is the conference where if you lose one, that might do it for you. I think that you might see the playoff committee more keen to put in a one-loss SEC team or a one-loss Big Ten team, depending on what the one-loss Big Ten team is. Like I think I put Ohio State in. They have the Notre Dame game. Michigan kind of has a weak schedule. If they lose one and don't end up winning the conference, I don't think they quite make their way in. So I think ACC, that's where if you have the one loss, you might be the conference that needs the help because you have the weaker strength of schedule. There are still good games that they're playing. The back half of Clemson's schedule is no joke with South Carolina. I think they have Notre Dame again this year?
No,
not this year. They have South Carolina, they have North Carolina, and someone else in the back half. But
excuse me, they do have Notre Dame.
Oh, there you go. And that's all.
Yeah, their last four are Notre Dame versus Virginia Tech versus North Carolina at South Carolina. So
yeah,
tough way to end it.
It's not a nothing schedule, but it also isn't Alabama's schedule or isn't LSU's schedule, where I think those are still much more competitive. I think I've gone through the major five conferences. So Tennessee would be the most fringe of all those teams that I've mentioned. I think they have a chance to make it to the playoff. I just think they really have to have everything roll right. The others, I think, have a much more clear path. But I think, I guess I'm taking it all the way through. My prediction is we have a lot more undefeated teams this year than we have in the recent past. So we had 3 last year. I guess that's how many I expect this year. I've got Georgia going unscathed and winning in the SEC title game, going number 1 into the playoff. At number 2, I have Michigan. Michigan has a really easy schedule for a long time, and then they run into some of the only 2 teams I expect to give them a super big fight. Maryland might shut me up about that because they gave them a little bit of a hard time last year. But I expect Ohio State and Penn State to be the ones to compete against Michigan. But I see Wolverines coming out on top again. I don't think anyone in the West is going to stop them in the Big 12 title or Big 10 title game. So I have them at number 2. Number 3, I have the USC Trojans. And this is me being a big Caleb Williams Kool-Aid drinker. I've been watching a lot of just games in the last week. Like, I'm dying for college football. I've been watching all these games that I couldn't pass. I'm like, man, I forgot how good Caleb Williams is and how funny he is to watch. Obviously, there's more to a team than a quarterback, but I think they have, by a decent distance, the best quarterback. And barring him getting hurt, I think they've got what it takes to run the table. You don't have to play in Rice-Eccles Stadium. Corey, go ahead.
The Drake May lover says Caleb Williams is better.
Yeah, I think that's.
Are the 10 quarterbacks better than?
Oh boy,
no,
let's not
absolutely
start this already. The season hasn't even started yet.
I'm sure in week 1 I'll find some quarterback to pick on and say how he's so bad before he wins the national title. No, I'm a Drake May lover, absolutely, but Caleb Williams is a different level of talent and somebody who can win games on his own. You don't have to play at Utah this year, and hopefully you're not injured if you play them again, because that's really what I feel did them in that Pac-12 title game. Of course, it was a blowout, and I've seen some preseason, at least like the preseason Pac-12 All-Americans, and Kalen Bullock's on there, and I just can't understand it because he's. I don't understand. It's half the game he's bad at. If they're running, like, if it's a run, it's not only he's bad at tackling, he wants nothing to do with it. Like, if you're paying attention, he is not crashing down to meet you in the hole. He's looping around the backside, and in credit to him, sometimes he's there to be the last one to make the tackle, but he's very intentionally very far away from it. And he's happy to come down and smack a running back or wide receiver in the flat. But as soon as it's on the open field and he's got to, you have just as much head of steam as he does, he wants nothing to do with it. And so you're going to need Bear Alexander to step up big. That defense is going to have to improve a lot, because if you have Tyjae Spears, as we've seen, running to him, or Yasmin, the tight end from Utah, sorry, I don't think he's one that you can rely on to stop that from going in the end zone. That's just what we've seen in the recent history. Hopefully, for his sake, he's improved that. But the toughness isn't built overnight, I don't think. And I think that's a little bit what he's lacking there. I do expect the defense to improve. That said, I think he's okay in coverage. I think he's decent in the pass game, had 5 interceptions last year. Doesn't really let up the big play, which is nice. But sorry, I went on a tangent there, but it's because I think it might be the Achilles heel of the team. I don't see the offense having trouble scoring. It's just, can the defense stop the run? And they're going to have to do it at the front 7, I think, because I don't think the second level's ready to quite step in and fill in with great physicality. Number 4, I have the Texas Longhorns. This one I think is going to be the one-loss Texas Longhorns, and I don't know where that one loss is going to be. I could see them winning at home against Alabama. I don't see them winning the whole season because, like Corey, I share some reservations about Steve Sarkisian and his in-game coaching. But that talent is unreal on the offensive side of the ball. And with not only the talent at the skill positions, I should say the wide receiver positions specifically, but also at quarterback, where, hey, if Quinn Ewers is getting the job done, I've got somebody who will. That's a really, really powerful thing to have. And last year, Hudson Card came in, who got hurt immediately. And that, you lose your backstop with that. But I think a one-loss Texas team makes it into the playoff. With that, you can see I think Clemson and Florida State will both pick up a loss at some point, and I think they'll be the ones who are on the outside looking in, similar to, I guess, the USC last year. I'm trying to think if there was a one-loss team that didn't make it in last year. Most of them had 2 losses. Clemson had 2 losses. USC had 2. But that's how I see the playoffs shaking out. So Georgia, Michigan, USC, Texas. I have Georgia against Texas and Georgia stomping them in that first game. Michigan, USC. I have USC coming out. I just think that's the way it's going to go. I think Dorian Singer is going to have a phenomenal year. He's going to love his new quarterback. I think Caleb Williams has no drop off and makes it to the title game, and then loses to Georgia. And ultimately, the Georgia Bulldogs are the three-peat champions, the first three-peat since, I think, 1936, when it was Minnesota. The only other team to win 3 national titles in a row. Sorry for the long-windedness. Those are my contenders. Those are my playoffs. Georgia's my winner.
I like the way you went about it, Ryan. Like, you kind of like went through each conference and analyze who could come out of the conference. I took a different viewpoint. Steve, is it okay if I go next?
Yeah, go. Yeah.
So I went to Bud Elliott's blue chip ratio. I said, all right, you've proven it that if you want to be a national champion winner, you have to have over 50% blue chip ratio. If you're not familiar with it, that's the thing. It's like 50% of your team needs to be a 4-star or 5-star or better in order for you to win a championship. This year, there were 16 teams before transfers that had a 50% or higher. So, and then I went through and said, okay, which of these 16, would I eliminate? And are there any I might put in? So I'm going to read them off to you real quick. And this is after transfers in and out. Alabama is at 88%. Ohio State is at 81%. Georgia is at 77%. A&M is at 67%. Clemson is at 70%. LSU is at 66%. Texas is at 68%. Oklahoma is at 62%. Oregon is at 61%. Notre Dame at 62%. Florida at 63%. Miami at 53%. Penn State at 53%. Michigan at 55%. USC at 50%. And Auburn, who was at 51 before transfers, and then after transfers at 47. So if you want to go strictly at 50%, you have 15 teams. All right, so quickly running through those, because I know if you're listening to this podcast, you probably have no clue what, of the visual things. Teams I'm going to scratch off the list. Alabama, I think, contender. Ohio State, contender. Georgia, contender. A&M, sorry, I don't see it. You got to get your ducks in a row. You have a hard schedule. Not putting them in my contender list. Scratching them off the list. Clemson, contender. LSU, contender. Texas, contender. Oklahoma, contender. Oregon, contender. Notre Dame, I've already told you how I feel about them. I'm interested to see how this kind of offense goes. I pulled them off my contender list. Florida, albeit I am high on them. I'm not that high on them. Not a contender. Miami, I'm not going to say it's a contender, but it would not shock me if they pulled something. If they played up to the level that they are, they could do something incredible. Penn State, I took them off my contender list only because you have to play Michigan and Ohio State. They are going to be a good team, but I mean, you're facing the juggernaut that is Michigan that's kind of got itself working well and has all the parts coming back, and then Ohio State, which is the second highest blue chip percentage team in the country. All right, Michigan contender because I think highly of them. By the way, out of all these teams, they're the only team that went up in blue chip ratio after transfers rather than down.
Wow.
So they went from a 54 to a 55. Thank you, Bud Elliott, for all this information. Not my own insight. USC contender. Auburn, sorry, not a contender. I don't even explain that one. They just have to figure out everything on Hugh Freeze. So I ended up with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 contenders out of those. And then I threw in, then I went to my list and said, are there any that are not contenders that are 50% blue chip that might be able to break this mold? And the only team I can come up with is Florida State. They were before transfers. And this is all Bud Elliott, so don't take me for this. They were a 38% blue chip ratio, and after transfers moved up to a 41. The reason I think that they could potentially break this mold is the fact that they have a lot of good talent, like top level talent, but they don't have the depth that they need. So they would need to be very good with injuries and be able to sustain those things. If you have an injury at quarterback or a major injury at, safety, this team is going to go off the rails a little bit. But if they can stay healthy, there's a chance for them. So I moved them into my contender spot so that I have 11 total contenders. That being said, like Brian, I think this is going to be an interesting year. I think that you have some teams that go undefeated. So looking at everything over the whole, Georgia's got a piece of cake schedule. If they lose a game, they should be out of this. But I have Georgia going as number one on my playoffs. I think they're undefeated. I think they win the SEC title game. Number two, I think Michigan is the best team in the Big Ten, and I think you have the opportunity to prove that with the running game and your defense that can hold people off, that you can pound people enough to win this game or win that conference. So I have Michigan as number two. Those two were pretty easy picks for me. My next two picks are a little difficult because I go through about 3 or 4 different teams. But my teams are not the ones that you would pick. USC, I did not pick USC or consider USC because I do think that Pac-12 is so hard to get through. I mean, you have Oregon, Utah, you have Oregon, Oklahoma, or Oregon State. You have any team that you can just stumble over, and then you stumble over one team that isn't quote unquote superly highly ranked by the SEC or SEC team. You're going to have a hard time getting in there. I mean, we looked at USC last year. They might have made it they probably would have made it if they won the Pac-12 championship, but it would have been considered maybe. And so I have them out. Brian, you said Texas. I have the Big 12 out just because I think equally there's a lot of parity in the Big 12, and there are teams that can beat people. And unlike you, I don't think if Texas loses or beats Bama, if they lose to anybody else, I still think I don't think they can get in unless they lose to an undefeated Oklahoma. You have to have a respectable loss in there. If they lose to anybody else outside of Alabama, I don't think they quite get in. So I went to the ACC. I think Clemson's the best team in the ACC. I think the addition of Garrett Riley is going to make Caleb Kluge hum. I think they have a pretty easy schedule relatively to other teams. They don't face any teams that have higher blue chip ratio than them. The only thing I think they do face Notre Dame, which has a plus 50% blue chip ratio, and that might be it. Don't quote me on that, but I think that might be the case. So they should win all their games, and so I think they go undefeated potentially here and win the ACC, and they are my number 4 team actually, because I think the ACC is not going to be respected, and so I have to go to who are my one-loss teams. And unlike you guys, I do not have LSU winning the SEC champ or being second in the SEC. I have Bama being second in the SEC. I have Bama and Ohio State kind of being the two one-loss teams. I like, who do I consider? And I put Bama in at 3.
Well, that debate would be wild. People would be
It would
melting down.
it would be an interesting debate. But because I have those conferences being respected a little bit more, I have them above Clemson. So I have Georgia 1, Michigan 2, Bama 3, Clemson 4. Georgia and Clemson, is going to be a fun game to watch. I think it's a close game. I think Georgia wins that. Michigan and Bama, also a very fun game. Kind of two similar styles. I expect Bama to run the ball a freak ton this year. I expect us to go back to like 70% run, 30% pass. And I think it's going to be a hard-nosed ball. I have Michigan coming out on top of there. So I have Georgia and Michigan in my final. And unlike Brian, I do not have Georgia three-peating. I have Harbaugh pulling it off, joining the list of college football champion coaches. I hate saying that because I'm not a Harbaugh fan, but he proved to me that he can call the games well when he needs to, that his team can find ways to win in hard-nosed games last year. And although they got blown out by TCU, right, like there's no denying that. I think they'll learn from that. And I think that puts a huge chip on their shoulder for them to kind of go in this. If you notice, I'm picking two teams that have like chips on their shoulder with Bama and Michigan. Like I think Michigan people think, oh, nobody really respects us because we got our butts kicked in semifinals. And Bama's like, no one respects us because they think we're going to lose the SEC again. Like this is bullcrap. And so I think you have two teams that have chips on their shoulders, two coaches who personally carry those chips on their shoulders and are going to find a way to make those chips go away.
Interesting. Yeah. Oh, go, Bray.
I love first of all, I love your process as a whole because to me it spells out some of the things where like there were teams like Penn State or Florida State who I saw as a playoff contender but not a national title contender, where it's like I feel like there's a path to the playoff, but when you talk about the blue chip ratio, it's like there's no way I see in a 14 playoff those teams winning out to the national title. And so like you cut down to like who are people that can actually win this thing, and going from there. And I really like that approach of looking at it. The other thing I'd say is Michigan is really intriguing if you look at, can we get not a big one, but a slight jump in J.J. McCarthy's play. You get a slight jump in his play. I mean, they've got so much coming back. They've got so much going in the run game. We saw when he started to let loose a little bit against Ohio State. If you can see some consistency in his game and not have some of the turnovers that popped up in the postseason, yeah, I mean, they have what it takes to compete with anyone. But that's just my 2 cents. I love the picks.
Jump. Like you see quarterbacks sometimes like you hear the sophomore slump, but quarterbacks that had a year to sit and then played and then kind of had that time, like you see that growth and you see they can kind of get better because they've been in the system for a little bit longer. I don't know what JJ is. Is he sophomore, junior?
He should be a redshirt sophomore now.
That's what my heart said he would be. He would be a redshirt sophomore. So he's been in the system for a little bit. He's aware of what's going on. And now not only is he like, oh, I'm no longer deer in the headlights. Now I'm starting to gain control of the system and I can maneuver it and take it to my own abilities. Steve, any thoughts on my picks? I saw some odds.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's going to be funny just like to go back and for those that have that are watching the video, like just go back and watch my responses after I take you through my own thought process. I think you'll see like not much of a poker face for me. Yeah, some surprises there, but and Corey, you've said this before, I think on the pod and definitely off the pod to us, where Brian and I apparently think very much alike and you think a little bit different. You're going to see that play out here, both in process and in results.
I think us being all the same makes for horrible podcasting. We got to, us Austin better at making the argument. I told Heather this. I was like, we like to make the argument. We like to make the counter argument. But in this case, Brian and Steve are so concerned with trying to be right because I don't have that worry because I was right last year. I don't have to worry about it as much.
That's true.
Well, I mean, to me, like predictions is what I think is going to happen, right? And I'm going to get some wrong. I'm going to get much less right. But again, my thought process was that same. I was like, okay, who can make it to the playoff, and then from there, who really has the capability to win it? Those are to me two separate questions, right? So I'll quickly rattle off the ones that I even considered as playoff contenders, and I also kind of listed like what needs to go right for each of these teams. Um, so Georgia, what needs to go right? No traffic violations. Like basically they're there, right? Like that's the only thing I could think of. Like all right, only if like 7 or 8 of their team are just really laying the hammer down, or is there really a way that they don't go to the playoff? Alabama quarterback's got to be serviceable. That's my big thing with them. Like I don't know if many teams will be able to kind of stack the box and force them to throw, but if they reach 1 or 2 of those, it could be a real problem. LSU secondary needs to keep a lid on things. It's a big concern of mine for LSU. So that's the one that I have some concern with. Tennessee, Milton, is he consistently accurate? I think it's too much to ask, but I did consider him. A&M, the Petrino hire, if that goes right, I think they're a contender. But I don't have them. I don't have them doing making the playoff this year. But I'm just saying, in a perfect world for them, if that hire goes right, they can make a substantial improvement on last year's 5-7 record. In the ACC, yeah, there's really only 2 teams I considered, Clemson and FSU. I'm right there of the mindset where I don't think anyone gets out of the ACC unscathed, and I'm not sure a one-loss ACC team is going to make the playoff. So, spoiler alert, I don't have either of them. Texas, for me, it's no letdown games, and this is something that they have to prove. It's something I got to see, but I think they're able to get up for the big games. It's can they bring that same effort to every single game and not have a letdown somewhere in between the Bamas, Oklahomas, and Kansas States of the world. Kansas State, I had on there. I'm concerned about their performance on the defensive line specifically. They lost quite a bit, so that's a concern of mine. I do think they offensively they might even get slightly better just with a full year of. Oh gosh, now I'm blanking on their quarterback's name. I forget his name.
Will Howard.
Will Howard. That's it. I wanted to say Will Johnson, and I knew that was wrong. But I think they get better there. But you lose Deuce Vaughn, you lose Malik Knowles. Like you lose some weapons. I don't know if they'll be able to replace him. Penn State, I need the offense to score 30 a game. If it scores 30 a game, I think they're definitely a contender. Ohio State, win in Ann Arbor. Pretty simple. Michigan, I think if you split Penn State and Ohio State, you're probably in. If you split it, whether or not you go to the Big Ten championship, I think, again, they've just been given, I think they're starting to get the benefit of the doubt like a Georgia typically does. Oregon, I need the offense to hold serve after a change in offensive coordinator. USC defense does enough, and I think it will. Oregon State, I think the QB elevates us, and then the us against the world mentality where they're being left out of everything. I don't know if you guys saw, I retweeted earlier today from our account. Max Brown, the former USC QB, former Pitt QB, basically said, Oregon State, what if they, run the table in the Pac-12 and are a playoff, participant this year and don't have a conference next year? Would love to see that happen. Just in my heart of hearts, I would love to see it. I don't see it happening for them, but that's a tough out. Washington, if Penix stays healthy and they're have better red zone decisions, I think Washington is actually one that I think could be a playoff contender, perhaps not a national championship contender like you referenced, Corey. The final one that I had on my list that I consider is Utah. I don't know why we're still discounting Utah after winning back-to-back Pac-12 titles. What needs to go right for them is QB health, and who knows if Rising's ready to start right from the word go. I don't see that as the case. But like I mentioned, we're similar in process, Brian and I, and we're actually exactly the same in results. So for those that are watching the video, go back and watch me as he lists off his playoffs. So I was just like, dang it, dang it, dang it, dang it. And then the exact same thing. So I have Georgia and Texas playing in the 1-4 matchup, Georgia being 1, Texas being 4. I have Michigan at 2, USC at 3. I think you have USC winning that semifinal, but I don't. I have got Michigan. You mentioned concerns about them being able to stop the run. What happens when they face one of the better rushing attacks? I think they can get run over in that game. So I've got Georgia and Michigan in the title game. It's interesting. Michigan's got like that part of their conditioning that's like the beat Georgia segment. I don't know if you guys heard about that. It probably needs to be revamped. I got Georgia winning a third straight national title, and it's back to the drawing board for the Wolverines yet again. But that's how I got it. I'm a little disappointed that Brian and I had the exact same four. There is a little variation. We got different results in the semifinals, but ultimately the same champion. Great
I'm
minds
so
think alike.
disappointed. I'm frustrated. It is what it is. Either I'm gonna be
All right.
massive. Like I tried to like also pick like not conventional because you don't always have the conventional win, and every time like the media kind of thinks way a certain way, like it very rarely comes out the way the media thinks it to does and expects it to. And so I've been trying to pick teams. I'm like, I know I think this, but I think there are this opportunities in here. I'm like Clemson. I think very easily could be a 1-2 loss team potentially. I think, like you guys said, it could be very easily that Florida State wins the ACC, but it could just as very easily be Clemson wins everything. So it's
Yeah. It makes me nervous, like the fact that we're all kind of on Michigan, like as a potential real challenger. Like I can still see a world where they drop both the big games and even have a letdown game somewhere in there. I think that's
they've
a
made the
really good
playoffs 2
team,
years in a
but
row, which I do think helps
it's
them. Like you
yeah,
get the
but
benefit.
it also puts a target on your back where it's like, okay, you're getting Maryland's best effort. You're getting
Yeah.
obviously Penn State and Ohio State's best effort. I mean, you probably would get that anyway, but just not only are you getting the team's best effort, when you're on the road, you're going to get the wildest environment because everyone wants to see that someone take down Goliath. So we'll see. We'll see what happens there. We'll move on quick here to Heisman predictions. We'll go that same order. Brian, I don't know if we need to go through a list of contenders or if we just want to say, like, this is who I got. Here's why I got them. Maybe we keep it a little bit more brief so we can keep this thing under an hour.
Yeah, I'll tell you right off the bat. My winner is Caleb Williams again. Our first two-time winner since Archie Griffin. Um, I I think this is a quarterback year, and it's going to be a quarterback who goes undefeated, like in all likelihood, who ends up winning the Heisman. Um, I think the one off chance for it being somebody else is my man crush Drake May, who I've waxed on about often of how impressive he can be. It's
Keep
waxing
going.
too much. He so I looked at like who are the past quarterbacks who have this same sort of trajectory, and it's a Johnny Manziel, a Robert Griffin III, a Lamar Jackson, a Tim Tebow. When you're getting a few losses, because I don't expect them to go undefeated or close, you're getting 3 to 4 losses, but you're putting up really gaudy numbers. And it seems to have gone a little bit more in the direction of you need to run a lot. So Robert Griffin had, I think, around 650 rushing yards only in his Heisman year. Tebow had about 800, but had infinity touchdowns on the ground because he was just a short yardage monster. But that was again not Florida State or not Florida's championship year. That was the year prior, or the year in between, rather, 2007. And now we have with Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson had 1,500 yards. Johnny Manziel had 1,100 yards. I think it's becoming more where you've got to be everything. And so Drake May, who last year had, I believe, 800 yards rushing, or close to 700 yards rushing, 698 if the stats come into mind, and over 4,000 yards passing. I think he'll need to up the rushing to be really close to 4 digits. And then if he can have a 2-loss season or 3-loss season, and continue with 4,000 yards to the air, he's got a shot, provided he doesn't have a bunch of turnovers in there. So he has the pathway there, but he'll need to step up from somebody else, because an undefeated Penix or an undefeated Quinn Ewers, I think, takes it over him. But certainly an undefeated Caleb Williams, I think, has a chance to. Voter fatigue is always the issue when you're going with the incumbent, but I think he's going to put up crazy highlights, and that helps you get over fatigue a little bit, where I'm not obsessed with the numbers. I'm obsessed with that crazy thing I keep seeing over and over again on SportsCenter.
By the way, Brian, you were exactly right on the rushing yards.
Yeah,
Thank you.
to a yard. Awesome.
Trying it.
So
Corey.
you have Caleb Williams. I think this is a good pick. I definitely considered him in my analysis. What I'm looking for is like my thought process is you're gonna have potential voter fatigue. If you ever get over voter fatigue, it probably is this year. Because like we have seen like all of a sudden freshmen getting it, and then true freshmen getting it, and then having that opportunity. So we are seeing change in the voting. But what I'm interested in seeing is like I want to see somebody that's electric and has a chance to like put their team over the top. And if I'm looking at my contenders like Georgia, Michigan, Alabama, Clemson, like I don't have anybody on those teams that like they are electric and they are carrying that team to a spot that they weren't expected to. You had Max Duggins last year kind of carried TCU to that spot a little bit. And if Max Duggins hadn't lost in the Big 12 championship, I think there's a chance that he wins that title. Maybe not with Caleb Williams. He was phenomenal. So I picked a team that I think could potentially go to the ACC title game with one loss or two losses, but you have a quarterback that is dynamic and fun to watch and crazy. And I'm going with Jordan Travis. I don't know if that's actually going to be a chance there. I just don't know who else I'd settle on that I like more. That's my biggest problem. I don't think there's anybody that's like, oh, we don't have the CJ Strouds and the known commodities that we had, except for maybe on the good teams, except for maybe Caleb Williams. And that's why I'm thinking like you have an opportunity for a team that's may be bigger than they should be. If they give Clemson a heck of a run for the money, or heaven forbid beat Clemson on the 4th, that's when ballots are due. And if they've already beat Clemson and LSU earlier, there's a good chance he's the main reason why, and he'd had to stay healthy. And I understand that he may not have the numbers, but you may have a Michael Vick, a Peter Warrick, a kind of flashy opportunity to pick somebody. And I think that'd be a fun pick.
I would say if you have any questions about the star power of a Jordan Travis, just go watch the game against Florida. He has 3 runs that are just unbelievable to watch, and you're going, how on earth is he escaping this? How on earth is he staying inbounds? How on earth is he staying upright and making it towards the end zone? Yeah, he was one that I thought about for a second, and I wouldn't write him off by any means. A Heisman moment is a big thing that people look for, and he has a couple opportunities. When they play LSU at the beginning of the year, it's on Sunday. All eyes will be on them. They'll have a chance to have the full spotlight. If he can shine bright in that type of moment, I think that can be the sort of thing. That was one thing I was also looking at with Drake May that made me not really keen to put him up there. Is like he has the South Carolina game early on, has some big opponents, but I didn't see loads of opportunities. With Jordan Travis, I don't think you'll need as bright a light because his freak plays are more freaky and are more, oh my goodness, I can't believe that type of moments.
Although I think you may not need them us as Florida State fans have become accustomed to them over the last few years because you didn't have an offensive line. And against Florida, you struggled a little bit. And so we saw flashes of them at the end of the year. I don't think we'll see them as much. But I do think like against LSU and Clemson, if you win those 2 games, you put yourself on the map and you should be favored in the rest of your games. And not that I picked them to win, but if you do have a chance, you do win. Like, how could you say like, oh, this 47% blue chip, or sorry, 41% blue chip team that has a quarterback that is guiding and directing this team that everybody slept on. It's a great story. Everybody loves the Heisman stories. Like the dude asked to be transferred to another position when Norvell came, and all of a sudden now if you look across the odds, tied for 4th or 5th in odds of Heisman winners. Yeah, it'll be interesting.
So you're saying there's a chance?
Can I take a guess at Steven's prediction before he?
Let's hear it.
I think you pick Quinn Ewers.
Dang it! Yes.
Bam!
Let me build into it though. So, yeah, story is a big part of it. You know what's a big story? Resurrecting one of the largest brands in the sport that for almost a generation now hasn't done anything, and several generations before that didn't do a whole lot either, despite being a place where there's all the money, all the resources, all the talent locally. There's a lot of proximity to talent. That's the word I was looking for. If Quinn Ewers actually takes them to the playoff, and as I'm projecting, is there a better one? Like maybe Carson Beck at Georgia. I think at some point they would consider like, all right, it's just like he's on the best team, right? Like, and I think that's what hurt Stetson Bennett too. Is just like the people around him are awesome. He a great player in his own right, but like, how much credit is he getting for the efforts of the others? And the same might be true for Quinn Ewers, because the receiving core that he's going to be throwing to is exceptional. But I think if you're able to deliver on some of the promise that you've shown, both as a recruit and even like in that first half of that Texas Alabama game, my man's dealing.
Yeah.
Like, I remember, I think I sent a text to all of us. I was like, if this keeps up, they could win this by a couple scores, and I believe that would have been the case if Ewers had stayed healthy in that game. I do think the offensive line protecting him is starting to grow up a little bit more. I think he's got every chance in the world to do it. And as far as like storyline and being juicy, like, what better of a story, not only to bring Texas back, but like, you know what? I was a kid. I had a mullet. I cut it. I decided, like Jimbo Fisher always would say, kind of like sort of paraphrasing the Bible, in order for the man to live, the child's got to die. He'd always say that. But like, yeah, what's better than Quinn Ewers saying, "Oh, I put off childish things, decided to take this thing serious, and look what we were able to do now."
I find that interesting that you guys both have USC and Texas going to the playoff, but you guys have split people who's going to win the Heisman, because I think that's going to be, if that happens, that is a fun and phenomenal Heisman race to watch. Like, I don't think that's a one where you have one team player blow the other player out of the water. I think you have one where
it'd be one where it wasn't decided,
yeah,
decided on Championship Sunday. It's going to be one that it's like, all right, everyone's going to actually sweat it out and maybe tune into the ceremony to figure out who won. Which I don't feel we've had that in a while. I feel like the last few have been runaways, but please correct me if I'm misremembering.
Yeah, I'm trying to think, like, in my head, the only one I can go back to is like Johnny Manziel and Manti Te'o, but like in reality, like, we didn't know if a freshman was going to get it. That was the biggest issue, because you had Colin Klein as the third guy there, and you're like, I don't know.
Yeah, the last three. Oh, okay, Devontae Smith was only 66% or 67% of the total vote.
He was a last two game kind of come on guy. Like, he was good the whole year, but he had phenomenal last two games, and it was like, all right, he's going to get it. But everybody knew he was going to get it.
Yeah, Bryce Young was at 83% of the points possible. Joe Burrow 93%. Kyler Murray 77%. Baker Mayfield 86%. Lamar Jackson 79%. So it's kind of been pretty apparent.
Yeah, where's if you go back to the last 10 years, Steve, what's the closest gap you can find? Or even go back to when I said Johnny Manziel, like
Mark Ingram only got 47% of the total points possible.
Toby Gerhardt in 2009.
That's in 2009.
What was Johnny Manziel in 2012?
Manziel had 72%, or 73 if you round up.
Interesting.
So a little bit more distance there, but
I will say the one non-quarterback who I thought about for a second was Marvin Harrison Jr., depending on how much Kyle McCord leans on him. And I think even with my playoff predictions, like, they can lose that game, but he could still – he had 1,200 yards this last year. If he bumps that up to 1,500 and has a lot of production in the end zone, and there's no quarterback who, like, say things don't go the way I've said, where Texas and USC make it back to the playoff, there's a possibility there. I think somebody else would have to kind of fail to meet expectation, so he'll need help. Won't just be able to have an awesome year and do it himself. But at the risk of sounding like Steve last year, I didn't put him as my winner.
Yeah, it scared me off. It shouldn't. It's irrational. That's another one of those mental fallacies. But anyway, any parting shots before we wrap this one up?
I find it interesting that we did not consider some of the blue chip teams at all, like A&M, Florida, Miami. Like, maybe Penn State was considered, but like, there's some blue chip teams that we're just like, no, not a prayer. And is that because of coaching? Is that because of? I mean, in reality, Miami 2 years ago, everybody thought was going to be a 10-3 team, and so like, why would we consider them not just because they had a bad coach last year or two? Florida, like, you have the talent technically, like, there. Napier's not a bad coach, but some people think he is. I don't know.
I'll tell you why, or at least in my head, why. It's because it's not just the talent on the teams, the talent distribution across positions for me. Miami, man, this may end up sounding stupid, but I think those corners are going to get picked on a lot. I don't think they can defend.
By
I think
Middle
they've got
Tennessee?
one guy in the secondary. I'm sorry.
By Middle Tennessee?
Yeah, by anyone. So I mean, Cam Kitchens was an All-American, which I mean, he had good stats. He's a decent player. I don't think he's like all-world. Like, if you were to ask I don't think he gets drafted ahead of the fourth round. So like he's fine. He's a good player. I'm not trying to take anything away from him. I'm just saying that's your best player in that secondary. And I think the corners are going to be picked on if you can get them in single coverage. And for Florida, it's at quarterback. Like you had a very, very talented athlete and who had some things to get polished, but who just was named a starter for the Indianapolis Colts this week.
That blows my mind that he's the starter.
And it's wild to me.
He was so inaccurate. Like, did they fix that?
But,
how did they fix that?
Right. Well, my point is that you're downgrading now when you're at Florida from a guy who was like a 58% completion percentage guy, and you now have one worse. So that to me says you're probably not a contender this year because there are going to be teams that you're going to have to throw against.
Are you downgrading? I really don't. I'm not sold that Anthony was that should have been that high pick. He's not. He didn't complete his percentage pass. Like what was 50-something%? Like.
Yeah, but then you're only factoring in his throwing. Like his running is another thing that keeps them in games, and Mertz can't do that.
Nope,
like not to the same level, not close, frankly. So those are my things. Like again with Auburn, who would they throw on the football to? Like it's where that talent is across the board. If there's a hole that's pretty glaring, you can expect, if I can see it, that coaches are seeing it and are scheming up things to exploit it. So that would be a concern for Auburn. It's not the only one. Quarterback would also be one that I would be worried about if I was an Auburn fan. But that's my point, is like for those teams where it's more evenly distributed across the entirety of the roster and there's less gaps, that's why I'm considering one versus another.
Yeah, I would add to that. So I think that's the case for several of those. And then you look at Penn State, Texas A&M. Those are ones where I say, okay, you're really talented, but so are the people you play. And that's all it is a comparative to the schedule. Were they in you move a Penn State into an ACC, now we're talking. Now I'm giving them a lot more, hey, maybe you're winning this conference, maybe you're making it to the playoff, but you have to beat Michigan and Ohio State to make it in now, I think. And I don't think that'll happen. So a combination of the two. Also, since it's parting shots, I don't know if it was Kitchens or Steele at Miami, but I again been watching a lot of football recently, a lot of just last season, and I cannot figure out why Miami was letting somebody open on the back end all the time. I don't know if it was a coverage bust. I don't know if it was scheme that was poor, or I don't know who to blame. So I'm not saying that he will have a bad year next year, but it wasn't just Middle Tennessee State who could go deep on them all day. They lost a lot of big explosive plays over the top, and with Kitchens and James Williams, that's not supposed to happen. Now, Williams, I don't think is that great in the pass game anyway. I think he's much more physical, roll that safety into the box and let him use his physical tools because he really has them. But that combination should be pretty good to stop explosive plays, and we'll see if this next year under Lance Guidry, who by all means people seem to be pretty high on, if that shores up and we see the talent used properly.
It's interesting you refer to Steele because I am not a Steele fan. I do not think he's a very good DC. Which is interesting that he's now the DC at Alabama. And like in my heart of hearts, I'm like, is he going to even call the plays? Is like Saban going to actually run the defense this year? Like that's kind of what I think might happen. I mean, I know you've had multiple stints at Alabama, but like you struggled at Auburn, in my opinion. You struggled at Miami. What are you going?
I disagree. I think he had a pretty salty D at Auburn for a couple of years there.
I just never thought he was a good DC. Sorry.
I think last year at Miami would be, for me, coaching is somewhat a business of, sorry, I know we're dragging along, but somewhat a business of what have you done for me lately? And it's like, well, if you were bad most recently, maybe you're failing to adapt. And so there's question marks at the very least for me for Steele.
Anything else?
I also felt like he spoke Clemson, by the way, too. So.
All right.
I'm going to keep getting my jabs at Kevin Steele.
Kevin Steele's catching strays at the end here. All right. Well, that'll do it for this week's episode of CFB Paint. Once again, thanks for listening. Feel free to like, share, subscribe, follow, all the things across all the socials / podcast. Feel free to please give us a rating, 5-star rating, please, I should say. And we will see you next week, where we may end up previewing some week 0 games, at least talking prop bets or something. Who knows? But yeah, excited that the season is upon us.